Do you think that people could say that if they looked at your lyrics that maybe you see more evil than good? Because a lot of
Yeah, we see a lot of morbid things in life. We cover the dark images of life that nobody really wants to talk about.
A lot of people just think Slayer is like open E note chugging endlessly, or they think that it's just endless fast crap, or they think that it's just satanic drivel. And there's a ton of Slayer fans that think that screaming Slayer all the time makes them look anything other than an autistic man-child. So I'm going to show you all No Mercy, and we're going to dumpster dive in this entire discography. So let's get into the band members first. You have Kerry King and Jeff Hanneman, who are the guitar players in the band and wrote almost everything. Jeff definitely wrote more of the material, or at least more of the stuff that actually mattered and was the more important stuff. Jeff was influenced by hardcore punk at the time, and Kerry was influenced by heavy metal. And eventually they both kind of got to a point in like the 90s where Kerry was actually a lot more into hardcore than Hanneman was, and vice versa. The quarterback in this band is definitely an amazing musician, Dave Lombardo, the drummer, known as the godfather of the double bass. But what's interesting is even though this early era of the band, he's pretty decent, he truly starts to shine almost immediately on the subsequent albums. And some interesting things about Dave's, he actually made the logo for the band by making it look like a crazy person carved the logo into like a body. And you can make a good argument that Dave Lombardo formed the band by seeking out Kerry King and saying, hey, are you the guy with all the guitars? And then you got Tom Araya, the bass player and singer that would definitely more focus towards gruff vocals or yelling later down the road, which would be very influential. Is a great member of the band, but I gotta admit he's somewhat of a putz in a weird way, where the other guys were influenced by whatever, especially the more metal and hardcore stuff, and he was just like, I'll play whatever. So they're playing a bunch of clubs doing covers, but what finally got them buzzed is they were put on Metal Massacre 3. They put the song Aggressive Perfector on there, and it's a pretty decent song and definitely broke them into the scene.
So we went out and bought the Metal Massacre album to see what the music was, you know. Okay, we know it's metal, that's what we're playing, but, you know, let's see what's on this album. So, you know, you listen to it and we're like, okay, well, we can play heavier than this, you know, and then we're like, well, we can play faster than this. So we wrote a song, Aggressive Perfector. And to me, that is the template. That is the Slayer template.
You'll ever need, you'll never be the same.
And they had to fund their first album almost entirely by themselves. They had to either borrow money from their parents, or you had Tom working as a respiratory therapist.
That Aggressive Perfector, and we did that song, and we were like so into the song. We were always rehearsing it every day because we wanted to go in the studio and record it, you know, in one shot. We wanted to be good at it. And we just, the more and more we played it, the more and more I think we just got really into the vibe of that song. And once we did the song, Brian said, I want you to record a record for us. You know, and we did. Okay. So we sat there and like, well, you know, we figured, well, we got to revamp some of our music. So a lot of the songs got dumped, and we took a lot of songs and changed them around.
I'll chop you in the pentagram and see you back to your life is just another game. I'll say it's not a duel.
I would recommend this album as a starter album for Slayer if you're really into speed metal, new wave of British heavy metal stuff, because this album's almost an oddity because it sounds hardly like Slayer at all. It's a lot less dark and just ultra aggressive, and it feels a lot more speed metal than it does thrash or even death metal. In fact, there's moments on this album that sounds almost like Judas Priest or Iron Maiden, where their influences are really coming out. You can just hear Tom singing and hitting high notes.
I slowly surround you with terror sets in.
melodic sections all throughout this album, and even really good guitar solos. Overall, it's almost a more uplifting, aggressive album compared to any other dark Slayer album, but it does have its moments showing what they would turn into, especially with songs like Black Magic, which we all know. And then you got other classic songs, of course, Die by the Sword, which is a fan favorite. I always think it's funny when Tom says, "My name is Tyranny, Forgotten Victims." It kind of sounds like he's saying, "My name is Tony, got some bacon." My name is Tony, forgot some bacon. And then, of course, Metal Storm Face the Slayer. And then you have the catchy song Antichrist, which is played all the time. It's got a great rockin' vibe to it. And honestly, it is my favorite song on the album. I can't get enough of it.
Screaming from the nightmares of our life, I want. Can't see, live inside now, will I?
But the one major drawback that'll make this maybe not a starter album for some people is the production. It's so bad that you can literally hear beeping before guitar solos at times. You can hear bass drums and cymbals off from each other.
It was a lot of bleed, so he asked me to dampen the cymbals, or muffle the cymbals, and I had to play like that. And then later I had to listen back and try to match the bass drum hits to the cymbals, and it was difficult because I played different every time.
Compared to a lot of other metal releases at the time, it's really not that bad either. Now, what a lot of people don't know is that Kerry King actually around this time quit Slayer and joined Megadeth of all things. And when he quit, there was a rivalry for the longest time between them, asshole versus asshole. But I gotta say, him joining Megadeth was a really important step for the band, because ever since that point, Slayer was a lot more aggressive and dark. And at the time, a lot of people don't remember this, but Slayer was actually not as heavy or as fast or as dark as even Megadeth. Then Kerry joined back in Slayer, and they quickly made a follow-up EP called Haunting the Chapel, which has 3 songs on it, but some versions have 4 because they throw that aggressive Perfector song on there. And this is a big step in the direction of Slayer, where a lot of the stuff is more dark and more atmospherically produced, even though it's more aggressive at the same time, which is a nice in-between zone that Slayer likes to be in. And the best song here, even though you got classics like Captor of Sin and Haunting the Chapel, is of course Chemical Warfare.
Chemical warfare.
Now, a funny thing about the recording of this EP, and about the recording of Show No Mercy even, is they had a friend that would later be the drummer and most important member of Dark Angel, Gene Hoglan, was pretty much holding the drum set together during the entire recording of Haunting the Chapel, because they, for some reason, decided to record in the studio with concrete as opposed to carpeting. He also did gang vocals on Evil Has No Boundaries from Show No Mercy. But the most important thing about Gene is that during his time helping the band, he introduced Dave to the idea of playing 2 bass drums at the same time. Gave him some tips, and Dave took at it, even out-surpassing Gene Hoglan in many ways. And this is a productive time for Slayer, because right after Haunting the Chapel, they released a live album called Live Undead, which is a really cool, dark album. But what's funny is some of it's not live, it's just them in a studio, some of their friends yelling. But the dark, more atmospheric, and even aggressive tendencies were the launch pad to the classic Slayer, and arguably their best album.
You can tell on that album that me and Jeff were really into Merciful Fate back then, because like all our songs, it's the only time in history that we had songs so long we only put 7 on the record.
Now, I don't really have a favorite Slayer album, but I'll tell you this, when it comes to Hell Awaits, it is routinely, at the very least, my second favorite. So I think there's something to be said about that it is the only one that I will always keep at the very highest, no matter what. And the reason for that is, to me, Slayer are not at their best and they're most aggressive. What makes Slayer truly a great band is when they're at their creepiest and most atmospheric. And even the fast moments of this album, there's a lot of those because they stepped it up in speed and intensity. Even those are arguably the creepiest songs in the whole album.
Lurking in the dismal fog, hungry for your blood, seeking harmless victims, satisfy my need.
again, the album has this very dark, uneasy feeling. The band is just known for trying to piss people off. They get a kick out of that. They like doing horror themes. They like doing, in Kerry's case, anti-Christian themes. They tackle darkness in the world. They do all different things. In fact, my favorite song on here is actually a song called At Dawn They Sleep, which is almost like 3 songs in one, how many cool different riffs and sections it has. And it's a song about blood-sucking vampires.
Apparition from the pits of hell. Daddy was the system which they dwell. The minute lost, the secrets they must keep. Addicted to your blood. I die to sleep.
And much more than Show No Mercy, which was just kind of following their influences a little bit and showing little glimpses of being original, this album is beyond innovative. There's moments on this album where you can literally hear the influences of, say, Venom and Merciful Fate being handed on to Slayer, and then Slayer handing it off to a new generation of extreme metal.
Crucify your soul, crawl on it, you'll follow me. This soul down to God found a slave for me eternally. See, now it's a star blade, twisted in the sign of the one moving on the domain of giving it the sign.
And on the tour for this album, they toured with Venom and Exodus.
So we're all drunk in the back of the bus. Kronos, Abaddon, Jeff Hanneman, myself, maybe a couple chicks or something, I don't know. And Tom comes in the back of the bus all drunk. I need to take a piss, you know. And Kronos, you know, typical Brit, you know, roared he in my mouth. Sure enough, Tom pulls out a dick. Piss, just doesn't do it in his mouth. Pees on his head.
Oh, come on.
Yeah.
That's dangerous.
That's probably not a good idea.
Well,
drunk or not.
Got up and sure, he did do it. Cronus got up, grabbed him, pushed him down the hall, punched him in the face. He had to do the rest of the tour with a black eye.
Even though this time for the band was super productive, they really only released 2 albums in what I consider the Metal Blade era. But they did have also the EP and the live album. But this album pretty much ends that era. And it is a hell of an era, and I would even argue the best era of the band. So what signaled the end of this era? Well, they were getting the interest of a man named Rick Rubin. And Dave Lombardo actually got the ball rolling by contacting him.
I heard through the grapevine that a major label was looking for the band. Mm-hmm. And I think I approached Kerry and Tom, and I asked them, you know, hey, what should we do? Should we call this guy or what? And they said, no, we're in a deal with Metal Blade. I don't think we can go. You know, we can step out of the deal. You know, they said things were cool at that time. You know, we don't need to move. I don't know. I felt it was important to at least question, you know, the offer.
But he convinced Rick Rubin to sign Slayer to Def Jam, which is more known for like rap and hip hop stuff. And Rick Rubin did have a lot of big label connections, so this was Slayer's big break here. And these next 3 albums are some of the, if not the, best produced albums in all of heavy metal because of Rick Rubin. And that's saying a lot compared to how he produces albums nowadays, where he just drags a sofa into the mixing room, lays on it, eats Doritos, and then jizzes all over himself and rubs it on his tummy.
You know, we were very into fast riffs then, obviously, because every song was based on a fast riff. And had no idea it was going to be 30 minutes long. We just made up 10 songs and it was over, you know, done recording, and says, well, there's 28 minutes. You got any more songs? We said, nope.
Ludicrous speed! Go! What have I done? My brains are going into my feet.
What is there even to say about Rain of Blood? The album's fast. That's all you need to know. Only 3 songs in the entire thing even past the 3-minute mark. The album's only like 28 or 29 minutes long. And every song on the album somehow has enough time for intros, verses, choruses, middle sections, guitar solos, everything. It's only until track 9, Postmortem, where the album actually slows down for more than an intro or middle section.
Holds the key to his own death. Entered into lava culture can see. Tying the tourniquet around your neck.
But what makes this aggressive, fast album so great is that it wasn't contrived at all. They just were into really fast, hardcore music at the time, and they just happened to write the whole album that way. They were like, let's just cut all the fat out and just write something we all want to hear, something that's just everything great that we like. And the album just turned out to be super fast and turned out to be fun that way. They just liked playing fast music at the time. And speaking of playing fast, Dave Lombardo was really coming to his own at this time. His fills were lightning fast all over the place. He had technical drumming. And there's so many memorable drum lines, especially on this album, even crazy fast double bass parts that are even better live. Another cool thing about Angel of Death is it was the beginning of many Slayer songs that Jeff Hanneman would write that he was basing off of World War II, especially Nazi Germany, because he thought that stuff was very interesting. And it fits with the horror theme of the band. A ton of people accuse Slayer of being Nazis and what have you, just because they did a song about Joseph Mengele, the Angel of Death, and didn't condemn him even though it's just a neutral viewpoint. But the album is so incredibly consistent that it's to the point where almost any song could be my favorite. I even really like what many people think is the filler, Epidemic. It's one of my favorites. But my all-time favorite song on the album, because to me it's just the best song, the best written, is Altar of Sacrifice.
Altar of Sacrifice, curse of the damned, the frozen evil you dread. Coalesce into one your shadow and soul, soon you will meet the undead.
What more could be said? It's the most popular album, it's very fast, it's a landmark album. It's the fastest album at the time of its release. It's uber influential to extreme metal and especially death metal. And it's arguably the first of that entire genre. So on this tour for the album, it ended up opening for an awesome band, Wasp. But funnily enough, they hated Blackie Lawless because that guy's kind of an asshole, so they were constantly butting heads. But they were also butting heads with Dave Lombardo at the time, who actually ended up quitting the band because he felt like he was barely getting paid anything. And I'd be pretty pissed too if I had gotten the band signed personally onto a major label and was still not seeing a significant raise in pay. So they got Tony Scaglione, the drummer of Whiplash, to come in and fill for him. But Rick Rubin would not have any of it. This was back when he wouldn't just sleep on a couch all day. So he'd call Dave every day asking him to come back. And it wasn't until Dave's wife finally convinced him that he would actually come back.
We were auditioning drummers, and we had come down to one drummer, and that's Nick Menza. Yeah, we had auditioned Nick, and of all the drummers, we had a few drummers that we tried out. Nick was the one that I felt, and I think the rest of us did too, that he had a lot of potential, that he could be a really good drummer. And then Rick Rubin called us up and said Dave wants to audition. So it's all right, have him come in and you can sit in and see how he does. And he did good. Yeah, so he was in.
Well, for the next album, Kerry King was almost absent because he was married and busy. So it was up to the three most talented members of the band to step it up musically and musicianship-wise.
That's the only record in our history we ever knew we had an agenda before we wrote a note. You know, we'd done Rain and Blood, and we were kind of tired of playing fast. We didn't want to abandon it, but in a live set, we didn't have enough stuff to accentuate the fast stuff. So we said, you know, we knew it was pretty cool back then, Rain and Blood. We didn't know what it was going to be today. Mm-hmm. But it's like, all right, let's make up something completely different, you know, because people are going to expect Rain and Blood Part 2. So we said, let's go out and make a heavy record.
Now, South of Heaven is another one that's always one of my favorites. It's one of the most unique, well-written albums. It's one I recommend to people that don't want to hear the uber-aggressive, in-your-face part of Slayer. There's great riffs, songwriting, and it's even slightly progressive in places. Not to mention there's actual singing, even though it's dark and not the greatest singing, obviously, but there's singing on here. And God, the musicianship. Dave is arguably doing his best performance on this album. But for some reason, him and every other member of the band tends to think this album is like one of the worst of the classic era. And at the time of its release, a lot of Slayer fans were pissed because, oh, it opens slow and dark and atmospheric, and there's slower moments on the album. There's a song that has a melodic guitar line in it. And what really annoys me is the next album, which is beloved on release and still loved more than this album to this day, is the same album in every way. There's the same amount of fast songs, there's the same amount of slow ones, there's the same amount of mid-tempo ones. The only difference between the two is that South of Heaven opens slow with a more mid-tempo song, and then Seasons in the Abyss opens with a really fast song. But what makes it so strong is that it's filled to the brim with not only classics like the title track South of Heaven, which is a dark take, not on hell, but on earth, because that is South of Heaven. But it's also filled to the brim with amazing deep cuts, probably the best deep cuts of Slayer's entire discography. In fact, my favorite Slayer song ever is on this, the second track, a song that's about abortion of all things, known as Silent Scream.
Silent scream, bury the unwanted child. Being torn, sacrifice the unborn.
Now here's why this album is really great and one of the standouts is, although Rain and Blood was amazing, what they lost was a bit of that creepiness. Sure, there's moments on that album that are, but when everything's blisteringly fast, it starts to feel more like hardcore music and less like spooky, evil, dark metal. And that's the one thing that Slayer does best, even compared to other thrash or extreme metal bands. No one does creepiness better than Slayer. But speaking of Judas Priest, there's actually a Judas Priest song in here, Dissident Aggressor, which is one of my favorite Judas Priest songs, and arguably the first thrash metal song ever. And they cover it on here, and for the longest time I was kind of iffy about it because I was more familiar with the Judas Priest version. But I've come around to it a lot more, and instead of doing high screams, they do guitar squeals. They do it a lot darker than the original, and it really does feel like a Slayer original. And I think this song actually influenced the title of Aggressive Perfector. And then you have the amazing finale, one of my favorite songs, Spill the Blood, which a lot of Slayer fans to this day complain, oh, it's got melodic guitar, it's got melodic guitar. Well, so does Seasons in the Abyss. In fact, the intro itself sounds almost identical to Seasons in the Abyss.
Went back and picked up the aggressive vocal style, which was the icing, you know, it just made it work. I think Seasons in the Abyss is the most complete record we've ever done.
From this point on, whenever Rick Rubin's involved with the Slayer album, it's usually just him as an executive producer position. Now when it came to this album, it's because he really was busy at the time and he was helping to oversee the album, so it did end up sounding really great. But from this point on, Rick Rubin turns into the guy that bugs band members or people he's working with for a quarter to go get Cheetos out of the vending machine so we could have a sugar crash on the sofa. One of the coolest album covers that has almost every song incorporated into the album cover, which I forgot to mention, South of Heaven did the same type of thing, which is really cool. And the same artist also did the awesome Rain and Blood album cover. And what's most prevalent in this is, of course, the face on the front of it, which I used to think looked stupid, but it's the representation of one of the best songs in the album. A song that's based about the serial killer Ed Gein, which would inspire so many classic horror movies, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Silence of the Lambs, and even Psycho, Dead Skin Mask.
The dead have taken my soul. Temptations lost all control.
Although this album isn't the return to heavy, it is the return of aggressive vocals and a lot less singing. And it does have a bit of a more lively sound, but it's not faster. But to me, it's the archetype of the perfect Slayer album, which means there's room for some rehash, especially the opening track, War Ensemble, where it felt like they were way too into returning to the past glories of Rain and Blood. Because War Ensemble, even though I prefer it to Angel of Death, honestly, it's pretty much just Angel of Death again.
What's the war? What's the war?
But it does have a lot of really great, slow, dark, heavy songs like Skeletons of Society, and my favorite song on the album, Expendable Youth, which has to do with LA gang violence. But what this album does best when it comes to doing something new is it really shows what the band can do when they be progressive songwriters. Harkening back to the days of doing Crypts of Eternity and, of course, At Dawn They Sleep, one of my favorite Slayer songs, they pen another amazing track, the ending title track, Seasons in the Abyss, which I've shown to many people that think Slayer is just noise, and some of them like progressive rock, and they love that song. And it was a big commercial hit for them. If any Slayer album's eventually going to hit platinum status, it's going to be Seasons in the Abyss. And it has the first 2 Slayer music videos, War Ensemble, and arguably the awesomest music video in the world of heavy metal for Seasons in the Abyss, with them in Egypt. And they capped out this decade of aggression with a live album called Decade of Aggression. In my opinion, one of the absolute greatest live albums ever, because every single version of every song is better than the original versions of the song, and it feels more lively, more energetic, and they all sound super tight. But Dave and Kerry were bound to butt heads again. Dave wanted to spend more time with his family because his wife was about to have his child in like 9 months, and he kept telling the band members, hey, I'm gonna have my child in like 9 months, 8 months, whatever. And they kept adding more and more tour dates and wouldn't stop doing it. So he was forced to quit the band.
Yeah, I asked him if they could, give me a little time,
right,
and focus, on the situation that was happening. And but they decided to replace me.
So they ended up hiring Forbidden drummer Paul Bostaph. Now, let me be clear. Paul Bostaph is a really great drummer, but he is not nearly as good for Slayer and their aggressive tendencies or even their good grooves as Dave Lombardo. He just does not have the right feel. But I can't deny he is a really great player. There's a lot of aspects in that he is much superior to Dave Lombardo. So Slayer would take a much needed break, which would end the classic era of the band. But to me, it's not over. There's still more flawless albums to get to. But I cannot deny that these first 5 are the best.
You're gonna hear a song one day, I don't know, something called like Nothing Else Matters to Satan or something.
They were writing the album, and they were actually contacted by the record label for a meeting. And it was showing you just how big Slayer were getting to the point where they had to have boardroom meetings about their albums. And they were giving them all these ideas that the label was going to do for the album. And then they told the band, but we need you to write a hit. And they heard the songs they had at the time, they're like, we don't hear a hit in here. So in turn, what we have is the actual fastest album since Rain and Blood. A vast majority of the songs are actually really fast almost all the way through. And to me, it's a very underrated album nowadays because so many people just think it's the 90s, therefore it's bad. And although it has weird moments, it's very consistent and still, all the way through, a really great album. Moments of it had bugged me for a while. I've grown to love every single song on it. But speaking of weird moments, we gotta talk about the opening track. One of the reasons I think a lot of people get turned off from this album is the weird song Killing Fields, which is obviously them trying to show off Paul is a better drummer than Dave Lombardo. So they try to make the drumming of the song so complicated it almost sounds messy. And the song is actually written around odd time signatures.
Devils and divers do not discriminate. A state of mind that becomes the ultimate end.
Although I much prefer Jeff Hanneman as a songwriter, Kerry King actually ends up writing the majority of the album. And a lot of his songs are the fast ones on there. You got awesome songs like Sex, Murder, Art, Fictional Reality, Circle of Beliefs, all fast and even dark songs. And the hardcore influenced Ditto Head. I would even go as far to say is Kerry actually has the better material on this album overall. But Jeff comes in and drops the best damn song on the album. Everyone loves this song. Even the people that hate everything after Seasons can agree. 213, the song inspired by the Jeffrey Dahmer serial killer, is the best song, one of the best Slayer songs.
It's about taking someone behind closed doors and ripping her legs off. And then eating her to death. The excitement of that section is sweet. My skin crawls with orgasmic speed. Last object for my subjection.
But the one thing that I noticed is that it almost feels like the album was produced in 2 different places on certain tracks.
We had like 3 or 4 different engineers. We were in 3 or 4 different studios. And we never even knew when it was going to change from one to the next. No one told us. So I'd be sitting here with you, and my engineer says, so whoever's working with you guys tomorrow, and I'm like, where the hell are you going to be? And he's like, oh, no one told you? And nobody ever told us, man. We had 3, 4 engineers like that. Studios were just the same. We'd bounce from studio to studio. No idea why, you know. I guess they were just trying to get a record out, and there was only like 10 days in this studio, and then you'd have to go somewhere else. So that's very detrimental to recording for Slayer, as you can tell by the way that one sounds.
Now we get to some controversy, because in the mid-90s, in fact in 1995, a girl by the name of Elise Poller was murdered ritualistically by some Slayer fans, and they said that they were inspired by Slayer to do it. So of course the idiot family members ended up suing Slayer. Another controversy is that at this time they released an awesome punk covers album called Undisputed Attitude, which actually has some songs that were left over from a Jeff Hanneman and Dave Lombardo punk solo project. And they also have a really badass new song there called Gemini. But their cover of Minor Threat's Guilty of Being White, they changed the lyric towards the end where Tom says guilty of being white and guilty of being right. And not only did it piss off the press, but of course the band members of Minor Threat. What a lot of people don't know is right at this time Paul Bostaph actually quit the band for a bit to form a solo project called The Truth About Seafood. So they recruited an awesome drummer named John Deddy for a little bit, who quickly had a falling out when he realized Kerry King's an asshole, and they quickly got Paul right back in the band. And at this time, the late 90s and early 2000s, nu metal was starting to become a thing, and a lot of thrash bands, especially Simple Tupac, were starting to conform to this.
I mean, who better to be the devil in music but us? Diabolus In Musica was probably the most experimental, for lack of a better word, for us, and it wasn't heavy enough for me, you know. And I think we messed around and, you know, tried to get away from what people like about Slayer too much, and we should have just, you know, been ourselves.
Now the title Diabolus In Musica means the devil in music, and I used to hate the album cover, but you know what, I kind of starting to like it, and that's how it is for me and the whole album itself. It is considered their worst album. It has horrible production, but oddly enough, Jeff Hanneman wrote almost the entire album. Now, pretty much almost all the new metal moments of the album suck ass, but there are some exceptions to songs that have actually kind of grown on me, like State of Mind, which is played a lot by the band live at the time and considered a modern classic for them. I actually kind of like that song. Honestly, most of the album, although there's maybe weird vocal effects at times to make it sound like industrial, it's actually almost entirely classic Slayer. Sure, it's not as good as classic Slayer, but it's in the same style. Bitter Peace is one of their best songs, the opening track. You Can't Stop the War Infection. But once you get to Desire, all the way to the end of the album is just great classic Slayer. But I urge all of you to try to get a bonus track version, especially the Japanese edition, because for some dumbass reason, Slayer loves to leave out the best songs from that session. They wrote 2 really bad-ass songs that are better than most songs on here, Unguarded Instinct, and then Wicked, which is this weird, cool, experimental epic that I think is maybe the best song if it would have been included. Now the release of the next album was delayed because it had the Bible covered in blood and burnt, and it had nails on it. So they had to make the alternate version, which I actually do think is pretty cool. But who would know that this controversy and any before it would be nothing compared to the day they decided to release it on.
Pretty new. Came out September 11th, which is kind of ironic, but If that's not proof that God hates us all, what more proof do you need?
If you listen to the intro of the song Deviants, now I've heard a lot of people have different interpretations of it. I know the song is apparently about a serial killer, and you could say that the sounds of the lady screaming are someone being shot, but I almost hear air traffic control chatter, and you can hear like Flight 7 or something like that in there. And it sounds more like a lady falling to her death, because you hear like kind of like the sound of movement, and then you hear more of a splash as opposed to an actual gunshot. So to me, the intro of the song sounds like 9/11.
1075 Victor at 427 West 7. Showtime at 1075 Victor at 427 West 7.
But what else is interesting is this album is very critical of religion and terrorism of all things, especially the song Disciple, which is one of their best songs and inspired this album title, because they scream God hates us all in the song. And at this time, Tom was becoming a Christian, so he was butting heads heavily with Kerry about singing songs from this album. But it's not really even singing, because instead of barking like he did on the classic era, you've replaced the entire album with Sam Kinison style yelling. And although the album has little sprinkles of nu metal, I think it's wrong to consider this album a Slipknot clone or nu metal clone, because most of it actually just sounds like hardcore, especially Payback. And just like hardcore music, there's barely at all any guitar solos on this album, but geez, there's nothing lost there, considering what do I want to hear for a minute and a half? Just endless wailing or just good riffs? And speaking of good riffs, my favorite song here is a song that managed to be fast, aggressive, and creepy. My favorite song, God Send Death. Now, one of the cool songs towards the end of the album, Here Comes the Pain, was actually supposed to be Brock Lesnar's intro theme for WWE. I don't know why he turned it down at the last minute. But another great song I should mention before we move on is Bloodline, of course. One of their most awesome, catchy songs that was a huge hit for them at the time. And the music video is really cool, of it constantly cutting between them playing and playing covered in blood. But it is a lot better than the last, and is considered a classic album for them. A lot of fans, this was their first album. So to this day, it is still of the modern era the most highest selling album and considered a modern classic. Now on to even better news. Paul left the band because he had some sort of elbow injury, which is, it's not good news that he had elbow injuries. But the manager went and convinced Dave Lombardo to finish out the tour. And then they realized how stupid they were for letting him go. So although they auditioned a bunch of drummers to replace Dave Lombardo afterwards, Dave Lombardo was the guy, and he will always be the guy. So they actually had a rare moment of being smart and decided, let's get Dave Lombardo back in the band. And this was arguably the best time in Slayer's history. The reunion of the band, they did this Still Raining DVD where they played the entire Rain and Blood live, and they had blood dump all over them. And Dave Lombardo was playing better than he ever did in the past, even though he had been in Slayer in years. So they tried to quickly follow up this classic album, but it got massively delayed again because they had some sort of switch in the label from Columbia to Warner. And you can hear lots of moments on these preceding albums that are very much just hearkening back to Rain and Blood and Seasons of the Abyss. But hey, it's almost like a second classic era.
I like what Paul Bostaph did with us, but when you play with Dave and you hear Dave playing in Slayer, it just sounds right. And no fans know what I mean. I can't explain it, but it just sounds complete.
But speaking of the classic era, they even have the artist come back that did all those album artworks, Larry Carroll, to do the most controversial artwork they ever had, where it had Jesus armless. But although the album cover is really edgy and cool, I actually almost prefer the alternative artwork where it's just the hand. But there's more controversy because people just can't stop bitching with Slayer, but that's what they love. They love pissing people off, and they really struck a nerve by writing the song Jihad, which was a song from the perspective of the terrorists of 9/11. And there's this cool bit at the end where Tom does this speech, which was actually inspired by a religious zealot in the Middle East. India's branch of EMI had to literally recall every version of the album and destroy it because of so many people complaining.
War of holy principles, I'm singing God's helping your destruction. Slit the throat of heathen man and let his blood dilute the water.
And just like God Hates Us All and even Divine Intervention, there's a great amount of fast material on here. Supremacist even goes as far to have death metal riffs and blast beats in it.
I hate the fact that we breathe the same
I just can't stop naming favorite songs in here. It's my favorite of the new era. You got Eyes of the Insane, which is an awesome song about PTSD, and they even won a Grammy for it. You have my favorite song in here, Black Serenade, which actually has two different versions of it. I don't care, there's like hardly any difference, but I love the riffs on it.
Your repulsiveness reminds me of dead flesh. Rotting corpse to smell of your putrid.
Slayer once again are idiots and left off one of the best songs from the album, Final Six, which they won a Grammy for as well. Now I understand that Slayer very much wanted this on the album, but you could have worked something out. Now one last thing to bitch about is Rick Rubin was originally supposed to produce this album because they wanted to go real old school, inspired by the best albums, even though they do have a lot of down-tuned moments. They got the original artist, they got the original lineup, they wanted Rick Rubin back, but he ended up pissing the band members off indefinitely by bailing on them at the last minute to go work with Metallica to have an album that has the production of a ghetto blaster.
How would you describe the typical Slayer fan?
But your typical Slayer fan would have to be the ugliest kid on the block.
Creature from hell, why can't you see the things I see? Mirror tells me that you were always meant for me.
I've never liked how the album sounded. And for more complaining, it has the stupidest music video for World Painted Blood, and the album title itself, World Painted Blood. Why would they pick that as the album title and the music video is god-awful? They should just call the album Not of This God. That would have been kind of a cool title. But the one thing I do want to complain about right here that's not just a problem with this album, but pretty much every album since the good old days before 9/11, is the fact that the albums have lost what made Slayer the best. They are not nearly as creepy as they should be. Sure, there's slight moments here and there that are just songs Jeff Hanneman wrote at the last minute, maybe one or two songs per album. Most of them are just aggressive or great riffs, but to me, you're the best when you're spooky. So you kind of get to this point where it's a little derivative. Kerry does all the fast songs, Jeff does the slight, slower, mid-tempo stuff. But my favorite song in here is, oddly enough, a Kerry King one. It's Hate Worldwide, which is an awesome, blistering, thrashy riff.
I stab you right between the eyes. You awaken from the lies. I've said it ever since its inception. We're the masters of deception.
What I find kind of interesting is Jeff Hanneman wrote World Painted Blood, even though it's a terrible song title. It's a great song. And he was inspired to write it because there was this controversy back in the year 2012. I don't know if you kids remember this. That everyone thought the world was going to end because the Mayan calendar ended in 2012. And Jeff was actually a little scared by that. He's like, well, why'd they end it there? Oh. And Jeff, bless his heart, would end up writing some really good, creepy songs in here before he'd get fired from Living. You got Beauty Through Order, which is about Elizabeth Bathory. And you have Playing with Dolls, which is the best creepy song of the modern era, which is about a kid witnessing a serial killer. So Slayer's at an apex in this part of their history. They were part of the Big Four tour, Big Four thrash bands, so Metallica, Megadeth, Anthrax, and Slayer. I would have been pissed to be those bands because they were pretty much just treated like an opening act. But they were essentially playing huge crowds before Metallica. And then, all of a sudden, Jeff gets bit by a spider. Now, Jeff, you're supposed to get powers from it. You crawl up walls and shoot webs. You're not supposed to get bacterial infections in your arm, so it's eating it away. So because this flesh-eating bacteria are made to spend months in the hospital, so they had Gary Holt from Exodus and Pat O'Brien from Cannibal Corpse pretty much fill in for his live duties. Now, bear with me. I'm going to play lengthy bits here of the members explaining their side of the story of why Dave Lombardo was kicked out of Slayer.
You know, and I tried my best to work it out with the guys. I brought Tom into the picture. I had Tom in a hotel room with me, talking to my attorney, and my attorney was telling him everything their management company had been doing to them for the past 30 freaking years. And we had an accountant, a forensic accountant, ready to go in there and look at the stuff. Tom got bought out. Management flipped him over a couple $100,000, who knows how much, and Kerry as well, to keep quiet and go against Lombardo. So they turned their backs on me, and when on the last day, here I am spilling my guts here, guys. On the last day, when I'm at rehearsal with them, and I saved it all the way until the end, this was like a few days, I said, guys, we need a new business plan. We've been on the same business plan for the past, you guys have been on the same business plan after 30 years. Now I'm an income participant. In other words, I'm a percentage holder. So if you're a percentage holder, you have the right, and you're contracted as a percentage holder, you have the right to see where all the expenses are going. Because here you are getting paid off of net, and then what? Out of $4.4 million, the band gets $400,000. Where's the $4 million? And that's just 2011.
The lawyers.
Lawyers, accountants, and the manager. For the past 30 years, they were doing that to the guys. And they took my information. I'll never forget the day. I said, guys, look at this. This came from your accountant. And it showed all the money. Where, it wasn't showing where the money was going. It was just showing gross, expenses, net. And out of that net, I made on tour in 2011, $67,000. Kerry and Tom, that was about $114,000 they made on tour. So if you did about 60 shows, divide that up between 60 shows. Anybody have a calculator? No, not 60. Let's say about 90 shows a year. 30 in the spring, 30 in the summer, 30 shows in the winter, in the fall. So you break that up per show. Really? It's disgusting. I'm not gonna, I bust my ass up there playing drums. I mean, I am just sweating, I'm beat. And for the guy in Hollywood Hills, for his facials, his manicures, and his little boys, no, I'm not gonna play for that. No.
I think I feel bad for Dave because he made some really bad choices based on listening to some really bad advice. It was really weird for me because when Dave made his big, tirade in the press, we were on a flight for 14 hours and couldn't make any rebuttals. So by the time we landed, it was almost like old news, so we didn't respond.
Well, who do I believe? I mean, we've only really got one side of the story here, let's be honest. And not to mention, for someone to repeat the same incredibly eloquent, detailed story multiple times, but be lying about it, usually someone will slip up somewhere, but I've seen Dave tell the story and reiterate the story many times. He tells it identically to the number every time. And they were mad that he took legally binding issues to light. I mean, come on, doesn't that just sound a little fishy? So what is the bad advice he took? Why shouldn't he have brought these issues to light? So ever since then, whenever Tom and Kerry talk about the situation, they always not only have to lie, or at least I believe lie, but they have to demean Dave too. They're like, well, he was never really part of the band again.
This is something that started off as something, that you want to do because you want to do it.
Yeah.
And then it turns into a business and it becomes something that you have to do because you commit yourself. And with commitment comes responsibility. So, I mean, to me, but there's a lot of things there were a lot of things that we didn't take care of when Jeff was alive. You know what I mean? When we were initially a band, there was a lot of things we didn't take care of.
Just a bunch of young kids, right?
Well, yeah. But I mean, we, at a certain point, we got a manager and then a lawyer, and there were things that we still didn't take care of.
But Tom has recently come out and said he is not a fan at all of how Kerry King handles business. So that just gets you thinking, man. Maybe they fired Dave because he had a head on his shoulders. Dave's the most iconic member. People started playing drums because of him. He's considered the godfather of the double bass and thrash metal drumming. And then to make matters worse, a death blow hit to the most important songwriter as Jeff had medical complications from cirrhosis of the liver, so he was out for the count. So they got John Deddy to fill in on drums for the rest of the tour, and even he was saying, dudes, get Dave back in, what the hell are you doing? So instead of John Deddy, they got Paul Bostaph back in.
My first impression was, why would I take somebody back that quit my band twice? And I even asked him. After we rehearsed, because we rehearsed, when we went to Australia, John Deddy bailed us out, which I was super thankful for. So I tried out John Deddy and I tried out Paul on the same brand new 2 new songs. I gave them each the exact same amount of time to learn them. And, you know, here's the parameters. Let's see what happens. And that was one of Jeff's last decisions in Slayer. He voted Paul back in, and I wasn't going to go against Jeff. Jesus.
And they got Gary Holt to stay in as a permanent member. And I kind of wish he did some songwriting, because Kerry King would pretty much write almost the entirety of the last album.
We started the whole process of writing an album, and we had to decide whether we wanted to continue and do the album and finish it. So I told him, I go, well, let's do that. Let's finish this and see where we go from here. You know, to kind of just stop and drop the ball. I think a lot of people would have been like, oh. But, you know, the social media being the way it is, a lot of people were telling us that we should hang it up anyways.
So, Repentless, the birth of what I jokingly call the Kerry King and Friends official Slayer tribute band. Now, there are a lot of Kerry King songs that were good, but this album feels a little on the drudgy side, especially whenever Kerry does a slow song. The drum sounds really bad, as usual with Paul Bostaph. And even though the album cover's kind of cool, once again, horrible album title, Repentless. They were originally going to call the album Chasing Death, which is a really great song on the album, by the way. Why didn't you go with that? That's a great title. See, the problem is Kerry King is just clearly not a good ideas person. But I do have to admit that after multiple listens over time, I can't deny that these songs are kind of catchy and they do get stuck in your head, and I do recognize every song on the album pretty well, even more than like World Painted Blood. And I do have to admit, a really good plus about this album is even though you have Gary Holt, who all he does all day is complain about the Kardashians wearing metal shirts, he does put out some of the best Slayer guitar solos ever, because he actually knows how to play a goddamn guitar solo. And with Kerry King writing, you have a lot of great fast moments like You Against You, and they reuse a song that was left off of World Painted Blood called Atrocity Vendor, but they redid all the lyrics for some reason, which was stupid because the original lyrics were so edgy and crazy.
Yeah, it's Slayer, but it's almost too sensationalized in a goofy way.
Okay.
I thought that went not too far, because I mean, we're Slayer, we can do anything, but it borderline not awesome to me.
What I do have to give Kerry props for is he does attempt to do a Jeff-style, slow, creepy song with When the Stillness Comes. And it's a pretty good song. It's a little different. I like the bass line going on. But do I even need to say the name of the best song? Do I really need to? Because the best song on this album is Pride and Prejudice. Don't give me that power. Obviously, it's Piano Wire, the only song that Jeff had written for this album. And I think it was even like a leftover from World Painted Blood.
We have one of his songs that was done. When did we do that one? Sometime in the last few years. But it's called Piano Wire, and Tom went in and re-sang it. I think we recorded it with the last album, and it just wasn't used. So Tom, it's that point in the session where you're just trying to finish things and seeing if you like it, and Piano Wire didn't really get its what it deserves. So this time we basically kept the tracks, had Paul play drums to it, and had Tom re-sing it. So it's a complete tune.
Body hangs, Piano Wire plays, the music will relieve you. So delicate and lifeless now.
Now there was like a music video trilogy that was made for this album, which is a great idea on paper, But once again, Kerry King's kind of a bad ideas person, so whoever they hooked up with to do this had cool shots of the band, but this like continuous story just feels like a really bad Rob Zombie movie. In fact, they even have Danny Trejo in there, which is also in Rob Zombie movies. And then Kerry was expressing that he wanted to do another album and that they had leftover songs for Repentless to be the next one, but dude, if you had songs that were good enough to be on Repentless, they're not good enough to be on anything. But then again, with Slayer, every time they leave off a song, it's usually pretty good, so maybe those are all great songs. But we're never ever going to hear them, probably. Because the band has finally called it quits. Now, Tom had been expressing that he wanted to call it quits even back during World Painted Blood, and I think they should have, and I'll get to why. But now they're doing their final tour, which just keeps getting more and more dates added onto it. It's probably going to be over by the time this video goes up. And that once again brings us full circle to why I'm doing this episode. I got inspired by this horrible End of the Road documentary they've been releasing, where they're like vaguely talk about little uninteresting bits from the early days. But what pisses me off is instead of consulting with Dave Lombardo and maybe like other people that were involved at the time, like maybe Gene Hoglan or Rick Rubin, they interview Tom and Kerry, and then Gary and Paul, and then ask them stupid questions that they would clearly not know the answer to. So you're just sitting there wasting your time forever.
And I heard the first song, and I just thought to myself, this just changed everything.
So all in all, Slayer's had a pretty good run. But the truth of the matter is, although this wasn't a bad time to hang it up, it wasn't the best time. It kind of feels like Brett Favre's final year, where it's like, dude, you should have called it quits at the end of the last year. So to me, the true spiritual ending to Slayer is the big 4 tours and before Jeff got bit by the spider. So the moral of this story, kids, is get bit by a spider that gives you superpowers.
I just said God hates us all. Yeah. What am I going to say after that?